we're super excited this is pretty much like our final program. And we have Dr. Father Greg Boyle. So I would love for you to give a big round of welcome to. All right, we're super excited.
Thank you. She wanted me to stand behind there and wait till she said my name, but it felt too.
Like a grand entrance.
Yeah, I don't. That felt too odd. So anyway, so this is not a large group, so I want to somehow yak a little bit, but I'd much rather engage your questions or ideas or whatever. So. Yeah, other than give kind of a stump speech or something. So, but I'm happy and I'm honored to be here. I've never been here before, so it's nice. So well, it's a privilege of my life for 35 years to have worked with gang members, and the day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am more noble, or I'm closer to God, in fact, than the thousands of men and women I've come to know. I remember a homie named Louis who was kind of a force of nature, who was in prison for a long time, a heroin addict, and he was part of our leadership for about 10 years, and then he moved away. But along with kind of running Homeboy, he was also, really a good speaker. And high schools in particular would ask for him by name, and it was... he started to inhabit this role a little bit, which was nice. And once we went out to dinner, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly, and and he said, you gotta pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. That's some good advice there. So brace yourselves. Here's what I think. You're not here tonight because of me, and you're not here because of the air conditioning, but I think you're here because you long for the world to look a little bit differently than it currently looks. And so what I think we all long for is really a community of kinship and connection and exquisite mutuality, a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And so we're all kind of working towards that. And we all want to kind of imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. So the list of books that you just mentioned, those really, they're all books about that. They're about dismantling the barriers that exclude. And I hope we can get into kind of a discussion about that. But I think the answer, of course, is to inch our way out to the margins, because if we stand at the margins, then the margins get erased precisely because we chose to locate ourselves at them. And I'm kind of a big byproduct person. We all want peace, justice, and equality. And I think, none of those three things can happen unless we are focused really on kinship. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those things, they're byproducts of our kinship with each other. So you stand with a particularity, I think. You stand with the poor, powerless, voiceless. You stand with those whose dignity has been denied. You stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. You get this amazing privilege every once in a while to get to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. And you stand with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. So I suspect if kinship was our goal, we wouldn't be promoting justice, we'd be celebrating it. So it's about kinship. And the homies have taught me everything of value, and I'm so grateful to them. But they've taught me how to text, which is the thing I most, and I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG, and the homies taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I know I'm probably not alone in being vexed by this autocorrect thing. You know, it just every day it kind of bites me on the booty. You know, it's like a homegirl named Bertha, kind of a tough cookie. She texted me on a Sunday and she said, where are you at? And I said, I am about to speak to a room full of monjas. And monjas is Spanish for nuns, sisters, religious. About to speak to a room full of monjas. I pushed send and autocorrect told her I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas. Which she thought was pretty darn interesting. Homies, their hair is always on fire. I can't even look at it right now because their hair is on fire. And oh my gosh, and they're going to cut off my lights and my car note and my whatever. And a homie wrote me and, you know, he said, I just need $100 to finish off my rent, and I didn't have it. So I wrote back simply, things are tight. And I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, thongs are tight. And he wrote back, sorry to hear that. What about my rent? So anyway, there I am in a car with two older vatos, Manuel and Poncho, and they both do a variety of things at Homeboy, and they're going to help me give a talk in Palm Desert. So we met at 9. And if you come to Homeboy, you should drop in sometime at the morning meeting. It's kind of magical. It's 10 minutes to 9 every morning, and we all gather, and lots of rituals, and it's hilarious and moving, and somebody gives a thought for the day. So I come by. If you're there for breakfast, come in for that. And it's packed. People are hanging on the stairwells. So we finished morning meeting. So at 9, they get in the car. Manuel's in the front seat, and Poncho's in the back, and we're 15 minutes on the road when Manuel gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles. And I said, what is it? Oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I just seen Snoopy at morning meeting. You know, he came up, gave me a big abrazo, and Manuel and Snoopy work together in the clock-in room. So they clock in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our workers, all gang members. It's a tough job. I would not want it, actually, because occasionally gang members can be attitudinal. So I said, what's he say? He goes, oh, it's dumb. Hang on. Let me, here it is. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, we died laughing. I nearly drove into oncoming traffic. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're rivals. They used to shoot bullets at each other, because I remember. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? So Homeboy was born a long time ago. I'll give you kind of the cliff notes, and then I hope to open this up to you guys to ask me some questions. Born during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village, largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, leading the LAPD to call my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and I buried my 227th 4 months ago. Not all from that community, of course, but I run a large gang intervention program. I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did was we started a school, because there were so many junior high, middle school age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them, so they were wreaking havoc in the projects. And violent in the middle of the day and selling drugs and writing on walls. So I walked out to them, and I would kind of isolate them one at a time, and I'd say, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one said, yeah, you know, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so that kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our parochial school to this day, and grades K to 8. But they occupied the first 2 floors. But the entire 3rd floor was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so I gathered them all in their living room on the 3rd floor. I sat them down one evening and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out, and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members? And so they kind of looked at each other and they went, sure. And that was all we took. That was the entire extent of their discernment process. And so gang members started coming in large numbers to the property, church property, not to church, but to our property. And so people in the parish started to say, hey, wait a minute, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed, good people in and bad people out? And I thought that was a good gospel challenge. And then they said, if only we had jobs. So myself and the women in the parish, we marched around the factories that surrounded the projects trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So, you know, we started things. We had a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, a graffiti removal crew, all made up of rival enemy gang members. Then the unrest happened in 1992, if any of you were around here in those days, and after the Rodney King verdict, and every pocket of poverty just ignited, except my parish. And so the LA Times wanted to know why that was, so they asked me. So I said, well, maybe it's because we had 60 strategically hired rival gang members who had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before, and more to the point of her question, a reason not to torch their own community. So a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million, read this article and he summoned me. So I went to his office in Beverly Hills, and he said, how should I spend my money? As I look back on it now, I can see that I woefully undershot my request, but I was young. I could kick myself now, but I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery across the street from the school. It's got ovens. They don't work, but we could fix them. We could put hairnets on rival enemy gang members, and we could call the place Homeboy Bakery. And so that's what we did. And so a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture. And not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. Nobody ever intends to do such a thing, but we have now effectively backed our way into becoming, evolved our way into becoming the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on our planet. 15,000 folks a year walk through. So it's kind of Mecca. Wherever there are gangs in this county, there isn't a zip code that has a gang that hasn't seen members of that gang walk through our doors. We changed. We're 31 years old now, but probably the first 15 years was Nothing stops a bullet like a job. We had the t-shirts that said that. And then we moved from being job-centric to healing-centric, and the idea was an employed gang member may or may not return to prison, and an educated one may or may not. But now we have an absolute, total, complete guarantee that a healed gang member won't ever reoffend. And so we kind of put all our eggs in that basket, and boy, was that a good decision. So all the homies want in. They want in part of this 18-month training program because it's a paid gig. Therapy, everybody's in therapy. 4 paid therapists, 47 volunteer therapists. Classes, you know, anger management. We have like 39 different kinds of classes that you can take. Case management. Free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. We have a designated clinic in our headquarters. 3 laser machines, 1 paid physician assistant, but 43 volunteer doctors. So if anybody's starting to regret that Edendale tattoo you have, see me afterwards, yeah. And it was all started because you keep your ear to the ground and you listen, you know, and it was all started because of a guy named Frank who came into my office 2 days out of Corcoran prison, and I didn't know him. And he sat in front of my desk and tattooed on his forehead like a big old black, you know, billboard, filling the entire space on his forehead, said, "Fuck the world," filled the whole space. And he said, "You know, I am having a hard time finding a job." And I said, "Well, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one." And so I think, where do I send him, you know, to McDonald's? You know, do you want fries with that? No. So naturally, I hired him, and he bagged bread for a time, and then I found a doctor. I went looking for a doctor, a dermatologist with a laser machine. I found one at White Memorial Hospital. And he donated 1 hour a month to chip away on Frank's forehead and a handful of others, like 5 altogether. In no time at all, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted the same treatment, so we couldn't stay with that arrangement. Parentheses, Frank is currently a security guard at a movie studio in Hollywood, and there is no trace left of the angriest, dumbest thing he had ever done, proving once and for all that everyone is a whole lot more than the angriest, dumbest things they've ever done. And so we have all our training programs in our businesses, solar panel installation training. We have Homeboy Bakery is thriving, Homeboy Homegirl merchandise. Homeboy Silkscreen's been around for like 26 years. Farmers markets. We have a thing called Homeboy Grocery where we sell chips and salsas, although we're not in Ralph's now, but we're in Walmart and some other places. Chips, salsa, and guacamole. We're also, anybody from the East Coast here? Stop and Shop. So we're in all the Stop and Shops. So that's 5 states. Massachusetts, New York, I can't remember what else. And let's see, Homeboy Recycling, which is e-waste. That's really a successful program. Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food at City Hall. We have a restaurant at the airport at Terminal 4, American Airlines Terminal. I don't know what I'm missing. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And they cater. It's kind of a who's who. How many of you have ever been to Homegirl Cafe? Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. So often enough you'll run into somebody, you know, Jim Carrey or Jack Black or Forrest Whitaker. Or once with 2 hours notice, we had then Vice President Joe Biden, a Secret Service called, said he wants to have lunch at the famous Homegirl Cafe, and So he came in, entourage and selfies with Uncle Joe, and he was quite affectionate with all the homies. Nobody seemed to complain. And once famously, Diane Keaton showed up, Oscar winner and Godfather movies, big movie star. Her waitress is Glenda, and Glenda is a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, gang member, felon, parolee. She has no idea who Diane Keaton is, and so she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off the 3 dishes she particularly likes, and Diane Keaton says, well, I'll have that second one. That one sounds really good. And it's at that moment, for some reason, I have no idea, something dawns on Glenda. She looks at Diane Keaton, she says, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere, you know, like maybe we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. Oh, gosh, I don't know. I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And then Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. That just took my breath away when they told me about it, and I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings, now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. Exactly what God had in mind, if you'll permit me. That you may be one, Jesus says. You know, it's about us. It's about, there is no us and them, there's just us. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So each one of us is sent forth, you know, to be an enlightened witness, people who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. We all need to be returned. At Homeboy, we're really allergic to the notion of measuring up. We don't hold the bar up and say, come on up, measure up. We just show up, and you hold the mirror up, and you tell people the truth, and it's a truth we all share because we were all born wanting the same things. And the truth is this: you are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. But then you watch folks on the margins as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. A great many Buddhist texts begin with these beautiful words. Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. And you know, that's kind of our motto now at Homeboy. Nothing stops a bullet like a job. Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. In the Acts of the Apostles, it has this odd line, and it says simply, and awe came upon everyone. And it seems to suggest that the measure of health in any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So a number of years ago, I was invited to Richmond, Virginia to speak to 600 social workers. And any social workers here? Yeah. So, you know, you have these, what do you call them, CEs or continuing? Oh, CEUs? Yeah, continuing education units. And so this is a gang in service. So it's one of those, you're in a hotel ballroom, 9 to 5, and you have a lot of workshops and keynotes, and you get CEUs, you know, if you go there. So, you know, I said yes, figured, you know, I'd maybe give a keynote or speak at lunch or close the day or something like that. So I said yes, and I bought my ticket to go to Richmond, Virginia. Then a week before I was to go, I pull out of my file the original invitation letter, and to my horror, I discover that I'm to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And I said to myself, oh, hell no. So I grabbed two trainees, Andre, African-American gang member, and Jose, a Latino, and I sit them down. They're like in their 9th month in the 18-month training program. I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia, and I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he's like 25 years old, and I think at that point in his 9th month, we have all these phases, and they're moving you around all over the place, the bakery, the businesses, clerical, tattoo removal. So he was becoming quite a valued member of our substance abuse team, and he's a man solid in his own recovery. Now he was helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues, and so he had spent a long time in prison, tattooed gang member, but he also had a long stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers, and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers audibly gasp, and he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. Well, I've never in my life seen, we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh, you know. And then he continued, he said, well, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. And she walks me up to an orphanage, and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine, and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and the second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could resume his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded So I'm going to end with this story and then hope to get you guys, not that story, but the story I'm about to tell you. So it occurs sometimes to universities in particular to force their students to read my books against their will. I'm not complaining. But my alma mater, Gonzaga University in Spokane, forced the incoming freshmen to read Tattoos on the Heart. And so they said, could you come up, you know, and speak? And they promised like a big room, you know, like 1,000 people. And I said, sure. And they said, could you bring 2 homies with you? And I always do if they're going to pay for it, you know. And so, and I always pick homies in exactly the same way. I always pick enemies, rivals, you know, just to force them to share a hotel room, just to mess with them. And then, I always pick homies who have never flown before for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. It was some years ago now that I had a homie, older Vato. We were at LAX, dead serious. He says, hey, G, are we flying Virgin Airlines because it's our first time? I said, well, yeah, it's a requirement. We'll be coming home on American. So I picked 2 homies, Bobby, African-American gang member who worked in the bakery at the time, and Mario, a Latino gang member who worked in our merchandise store. Yeah, I've done this so many times, almost 1,000 times. I'm going on Wednesday to San Francisco, and I just came back from where I can't even remember anymore, Chicago, I think, with a couple. And so I've never, with men and women, I've almost 1,000 times I've done this, and I've never picked anyone absolutely more terrified, panicked of flying than this guy, Mario. It was kind of freaking me out a little bit. In fact, he was hyperventilating, you know, like, and we hadn't even, you know, boarded the plane yet. So we go to Burbank, and big bay windows and Southwest Airlines mainly, and they don't have that, whatever it is, the hermetically sealed chute. There's a word for that, I'm sure. What is it? The jetway. They didn't have the jetway, and so you have to walk out onto the tarmac, you know, like you're the president, and you climb the steps to the front of the plane, or you know, the big feature at Burbank, you climb the steps at the back of the plane, and that's what it is. I guess if I touch that, no. Anyway, so our plane arrives, and they're deplaning, and it's early morning, and Bobby's off walking somewhere, and I say to Mario, that's our plane, you know, and he's, and I think, oh my God, he may die before we actually climb those stairs, and so then I see our flight crew, I see, you know, our pilots, and there are 2 flight attendants, females. Both of them have very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the steps, the front of the plane, and Mario says, when are we going to board the plane? And I said, as soon as they sober up the pilots. There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that, you know, so. But I should tell you that in our 31-year history, Mario is the most tattooed individual who's ever worked there, which, trust me, is saying something. And if you've been to Homegirl Cafe, you've probably met him. And he's just all sleeved out, neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids that say the end, so that when he's lying in his coffin, there won't be any doubt for anybody. And so I'm trying to calm him down, so I'm walking him through the airport. I've never been in public with him, and it was unbelievable. People are, oh my God, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely, and I'm thinking, wow, isn't that interesting? Because if you were to go to Homeboy tomorrow, walk up to anybody and say, quick, who is the kindest, most gentle soul who works here, they won't say me. They'll think for half a second and they'll say, Mario. Mario works in the cafe now. Mario is proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing the world. So we get to Gonzaga, and this always happens. They tell you it's the one talk Tuesday night, but they neglect to tell you that there are 47 other talks you have to give during the course of Tuesday. So it's like this class, this meeting, this lunch. So I tell these guys, look, I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. You guys get up and tell your stories. And so they do, and Mario in particular is quite nervous. And stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every imaginable kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance, otherwise you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a single day of either of their childhoods. So the nighttime talk comes, and I kind of structure it as such that packed, standing room only, kids are sitting on the floor, violation of fire code. And so I have Mario and Bobby speak first, a little 7 minutes each, do a little snapshot. So I can include them in the question and answer. I get up and do my thing, and then I invite them to stand on either side. I go, yeah, questions? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. And so a woman stands. She goes, yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario. First question out the gate. So Mario steps up to the microphone and, yes. And he's just terrified, and he's this tall, skinny drink of water. And she says, well, you say you're a father and you have a son and a daughter who are about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario closes his eyes and he clutches the microphone, and I can sense he's starting to tremble, and he's getting a friggin' hernia trying to come up with whatever the hell he's going to say. And when suddenly he blurts out, as soon as he says those two words, he rushes back to his closed-eyed, microphone-clutching refuge. And now I know he's losing the battle with his tears, but he wants to get the whole sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. And she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they will not stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that this room full of strangers had chosen to return him to himself. And let there be no mistake that they had been returned to themselves. And everybody looking at each other and saying, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. We're all born wanting the same things. And it's probably well past time that we remind each other of that. So we go to the margins and we brace ourselves, because people will accuse us of wasting our time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. Thank you very much. Ask me anything, and each question will lead to a long-ass answer, so I think we only need 3. Yeah, way back there.
I'm particularly interested in the funding that keeps you going.
I'm particularly interested in that.
Perhaps in the first years, 88 to 92, when everything was getting off the ground, and how do you look financially nowadays?
Well, you know, we're a $20 million annual operation, so the long and short of it is half of that money comes from our 9 social enterprises, and then the other half we have to raise, which is a heavy lift. As soon as we raise $10 million, we have to go back and raise it all over again. That's really hard. I once was quoted in the LA Times as saying, if we were a shelter for abandoned puppies, we'd be endowed by now. You have no idea how many angry puppy owners there are out there. Seriously, it was like, oh my God, I'll never say that again. And I just said it to you. So, you know, we're okay. It's always a struggle. I wish it weren't a struggle, but it's always a struggle. You know, we're a tough bet, but you know, how's that go? Tough sell, but a good bet, or something like that. You know, and I would think that by and large the people of this county are proud of Homeboy, and I don't think that elected officials aren't. I think we're the victim of our own success. Oh, they're fine. They got businesses. I buy their chips. You know, it's like. You know, we had a lot of people come in wanting to, you know, please airlift Homeboy into Wichita. That was the first one in 2008. Because once we were kind of established as this kind of place. And we had to meet and say, do we want to become the McDonald's of gang intervention programs, you know, with over 5 billion gang members served, you know, and we didn't want to do that. We said part of the reason Homeboy works is it was born from below, and so it has that character to it, that quality. So, you know, like with Wichita, that was the first one, and they had a delegation came, literally wanted us to airlift Homeboy into Wichita. And so we said, well, instead we're going to give you technical support. And so we'll help you start some. So most places have started social enterprises. In their case, it was called the Center Cafe in Wichita. And it was the same principle, rival enemy gang members, you know, working side by side, that kind of thing. So and now we have a thing what we call the Global Homeboy Network. So there are over 147 programs in the country modeled on Homeboy where we've assisted them to begin, and 16 outside the country. So we gather every August for what we call the Gathering, and about 400 of our partners come from all over the world, and we talk about, you know, best practices and what are you finding and that kind of thing. So it's all kind of the principle, the methodology of tenderness, healing, kind of a new idea of therapeutic mysticism is kind of what I've been dabbling with. If love is the answer, a community is the context, but tenderness is the methodology. It's how our love becomes connective. Otherwise it stays in your head or in your heart or in the air. But unless it becomes tender, it's not connective tissue. And so that's kind of what we do. Yeah?
Every time I listen to you, I'm inspired, but I keep on thinking of all of the other world's problems that seem to be even harder to solve than your problem. And right now I'm thinking of homelessness in LA in particular. Is there anything that Homeboy Industries could do to help?
Well, I mean, we, again, we have a lot of people, and gang members are homeless, you know, sort of mainly because they come out of prison. In this state, you do a long stretch in prison. When you come out, there's no there. You know, and you've kind of, all your bridges have been burned, so it's hard, you know, because homies are proud, and you have to dig deep. And where'd you sleep last night? Well, I was in my car. Yeah, I was on a friend's couch. You know, that kind of thing. So we help them. That's probably our next frontier, is to have a residence and to build something. But I think the principle is the same. Homelessness in the city won't change until you believe that homeless people belong to us. Mass incarceration will never inch its way ever away from being mass unless you believe that people belong to you. It's just how it works. And no kinship, no peace, no kinship, no end to mass incarceration, no kinship, no end to homelessness. You know, the largest mental institution in the whole world, on the whole planet, is LA County Jail. And so that should tell us how we deal with our problems. You know, and Homeboy stands for something. It says, what if we were to invest in people rather than just try to lock our way up through different problems? So part of the idea is, with homelessness too, it's what's it about? What's our diagnosis? Nobody's ever met a healthy treatment plan that was born of a bad diagnosis. That's never happened. Yes, ma'am, back there.
So it's kind of a two-part question. You mentioned funding, that half of it comes from your social enterprise, and the other half of fundraising for, you look for about $10 million a year. I would love to help with that. I have a question in regards to felons in reentry and in being able to get into work, right? So what you've been able to provide for them is jobs. And my family, all three of my brothers are ex-gang members who went from gangs to grad school. My family now does gang reduction in MacArthur Park in the Northeast. And I found that the cannabis industry, where the city of LA is opening a social equity program, and they have to make community benefit plans to go into the districts or the zip codes that have been impacted by the war on drugs. So my question is, I have went to Homeboy and I've talked to a lot of people in your staff, and they're like, well, no, we can't work with you because a lot of these people have substance abuse issues, and you are a father. And so I'm wondering, the cannabis industry is this new space of warehouse workers, managers, this whole new space where they welcome people with the past. Do you have a feeling or a thought about the industry, and if you're, what your thoughts are?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not, so against it, and, but we're a particular place, I mean, homies who have gone through our place. So keep in mind, after 18 months, we have a whole department dedicated to locating employment for them beyond Homeboy. But the 18 months is really a time of healing. We drug test, and we're pretty strict about it, including marijuana. And the notion is, don't numb this time. Don't numb yourself. And of course, a great many people are in recovery in terms of meth and heroin and crack cocaine, et cetera. So it's not like a prudishness. It's like, no, especially right now, I'll be honest with you, this is not the marijuana I smoked. I mean, anybody 65 in this room? Yeah, that's just kind of not, it wasn't like that when I was in high school. So, and I inhaled. So, I mean, you just, so it's different. And so we're kind of sticklers on this for the moment, because it's so easy for them because they're really excavating, and the social workers here and therapists know, they're really excavating hard stuff. You know what? I recommend to you, and you're going to know the full name, it's a hyphenated name, she's the first, Nadine Burke Harris, yeah. And the book is called something well, The Deepest Well. Yeah, and she's the first Surgeon General in the state of California, named by our governor. And it's a kind of introduction, if you're not familiar with the 8th study, the adverse childhood experiences and what kids are exposed to, And so, like I just did a retreat and we have them every year. So one for women and one for men. And there were 11 homies and me. And it's we share and people talk about their lives. And, the ACE study is 10, I don't know what the language you would use, like checks or like, things like sexual abuse, physical abuse, a parent in prison, a mentally ill parent, neglect.
Adverse childhood experience.
Yeah, so they're adverse, but there are 10 of them, and it's kind of like a checklist or something. So I can say, having grown up in the gang capital of the world, I can't check off one thing, not even emotional abuse. That doesn't make me morally superior, quite the opposite than the kids who I am encountered. But everyone on that retreat, because in just an informal way in your head, you're going, oh my God, they're 9 and 10. Every single one is a 9 or 10. And Nadine in the book will talk about, I want to say 5. If you're 5, and she's talking more as a predictor for health in the future, like physical health. You're going to have trouble with, I don't know what, lungs or something, or cancer or something. But I read that book and I found it so illuminating because it was really helpful about if we knew that, we wouldn't talk about, as a priest, we would sort of go, yeah, talk to me about sin after you've read about the ACE study. I mean, seriously. And that people have to navigate extraordinary things. And I've known this because I've done this for a long time, but sitting in that room with those 11 guys, horrifying what they've all had to endure. Now, is that why they became gang members? Yes. 100%, yes. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something, and they're 9 and 10 on the ACE study. And I say 9 or 10 because sexual abuse is a hard one for folks to talk about. And yet, I suspect. But they're 9 or 10. Now, I'm sure somebody will do a study somewhere about California state prisons and where are people on the self-identifying, the 9 or on the 10. And I suspect they're, it's high. In the same way that you talk about literacy or the same way you talk about no experience of a father or whatever it is, Go ahead.
There are people who are authentic in their, what they believe and stems from the same faith background. But how is it that in their authenticity they come to such different outlook?
On faith and Christian faith, for example?
Yeah, and how kinship is not necessarily what they consider important, and being putting others to shame or being judgmental is what comes in play. How is it possible to come to such a conclusion?
Yeah, I don't know. You're reading a different gospel than I am, but I think there's if you'll permit me to say a little God thing for a second, that there's a God we actually have. There is the God we actually have, if you believe in God. And then there's the God we've settled for, the partial God, the more realistic God. So you have Dylan Roof kill all those people in Mother Emanuel Church, and people remember this, that like a week later, victims of the family members of the victims are standing in front of him, and they say, "We forgive you." And you know that in their forgiveness, they kind of know that no healthy person does this, that this is anguish, and you knew that you were in the presence of the God we actually have. But then cut to 9 months later, when they sentence him to be executed, and they call it God's justice. You know we've wandered back to the partial God, the puny God, the lesser God. The more realistic God. And so I personally don't think there's anything more consequential in the world than one's notion of God. because if it's tiny, puny, you're going to be tiny and puny. But if it's spacious and expansive, then hang on, it's going to be great. But that's kind of where we are. We've settled for partial. Teresa of Avila, a great mystic, would say, our notion of God is a jar that you're supposed to keep breaking because it's supposed to not be able to be contained that way. And then so, you know, I believe God is compassionate, loving kindness, and I know all we're called to do is to be in the world who God is. And that's liberating for me. Now, people disagree with me, you know, and, oh well, yeah.
As you know, we are 5% of the world population, America, but we have 25% of world population in prison.
Yeah.
25. On the corner of Sunset Echo Park, you know, there is Twin Towers. You know, it's a prison. These innocent people are there for years and years. Sometimes I go to court and I ask the judge, you know, let, you know, some of these people to come with us. We go to different garden, different area to clean the area. Out of question, out of question, out of question. What kind of system is this?
Yeah, not a good one. But you know, I've been doing this for a long time. So 35 years. In the early days, the first 10 years, Homeboy Industries was marked by death threats, bomb threats, and hate mail. Not by gang members, because we were always a symbol of hope, but by people who hated gang members. So, you know, the friend of our friend is our enemy. And it was a short hop if I helped gang members and you demonized them to demonize me for helping them. And scary stuff, you know. And a lot of the anonymous letters, frankly, were from law enforcement. I'm a sheriff. I hate you. You know, you're part of the problem. Now, it's hard to retrieve that now, but it was pervasive. And so people who go, oh, nothing will ever change. You go, no, things have changed incredibly, and we're never going to go back to that. I found this old collection of poems that a woman who worked at the LA Times wrote these poems based on only on conversations with homies. And it's probably, 25 years old. And I found it buried in a box. I went, what is this? But I read the poems, and it's stuff that's ancient history. You know, it's homies talking about, they took me to the back of the factories and they beat me down trying to find out who, you know, Lefty was, or that kind of thing. That happened all the time. And it doesn't happen. Now people go, oh, of course it still happens. No, I'm telling you, it doesn't happen. It's not like it did then. It's like, and the toothpaste is out of the tube. We're not going to go back to that time. And you can say, oh yeah, what about this moment? What about this moment? Oh my God, it was pervasive. And I grew up in LA. And when the cops arrived for something, you breathed a sigh of relief. They were going to get the cat out of the tree. But then I came to Dolores Mission, I went, whoa, this is a totally different experience. So naive was I. I'd go to the captain at Hollenbeck, I go, I think you might want to know, they're taking guys to the factories and beating them down for purpose of interrogation or intimidation. And then it was shoot the messenger. So it was like, whoa, where am I living? But it was pervasive. Is that true now? No. You know, do we get hate mail or death threats? No. Progress. And I think that's important to acknowledge because we think, oh, it'll never change. Of course it's progressed. I mean, I think Barack Obama said this when he left office. It's like, if you think things haven't changed, you're not paying attention, which is good to pay attention and to acknowledge, because otherwise you just go, oh my gosh. And another point on that, especially with social workers here. You don't go to the margins to make a difference. You go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different. And unless you turn that on its head, you'll burn out. You cannot sustain the work you do. You can't. So I don't tolerate a lot of it at my office with my staff, you know. Oh my gosh, you know. And okay, you have every right to be exhausted. If you are depleted, it's about you. If you are depleted, you are doing this incorrectly. And then you turn it on its head. I was in Houston, and a former gang member and felon who was working kind of what we would call in the biz, hardcore gang intervention worker. He was on the streets in Houston. And I gave a talk, and he came up to me, pleaded with me. How do you reach them? Gang members. And I found myself saying, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? All of a sudden, you've turned the whole thing on its head. This is why people burn out, because they think it's about them, with all due respect. But the minute you go to the margins to be reached by people at the margins, so if I could get biblical on you one last time. So in the covenant, you know, God says, as I have loved you, our puny, partial God says, love me back. But that's not what it says. It says, as I have loved you, so must you have a special preferential care and love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger. Now that may not connect in modern language, but in old language, these were the people who knew what it was like to be cut off. And they didn't matter. And because they suffered in exactly this way, God thinks these are your trustworthy guides to lead everybody to the kinship of God. That's opposite of how we see things. I'm going to go out to the margins and make a difference. And we just finished graduation season. You won't find a graduation commencement address anywhere on the planet that doesn't say, make a difference. I don't, because I don't believe in it. Go there and be made different. Go there and receive folks, the widow, orphan, and stranger. Go there and allow yourself to be reached. What's odd about that is that it's always super, endlessly, forever replenishing. Because you're going, wow, what a gift. Oh my gosh, I delight in your presence. Oh, I've never had to carry what you've had to carry. I stand in awe. And what a privilege it is to know you. And suddenly it's like, I can't wait to get to work. And I know you know what I'm talking about, the social workers. But it's essential. And then otherwise we get into this self-care and compassion fatigue. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I go, no, stop it. You're doing it incorrectly. And it's a self-congratulatory thing. Oh, I guess I'm just so compassionate. No, it's about you, and stop it. But the minute it stops, then, oh my God, that's where the joy is. This is why Jesus wants us to go to the margins, because it's where the joy is. Not because it's some grim duty and the harder thing is the better thing. No, that my joy may be yours and your joy complete. That's why you go to the widow, orphan, and stranger, because they're going to alter your heart forever. See what I mean? One question and I launch. I don't know. I don't want to overstay my welcome. Yes?
I feel like one of our biggest obstacles in addressing any issues of justice is reaching that point of getting people to believe that we belong to one another. So for example, our current issue with homelessness, any discussions that I get into with anybody about that, I feel that's lacking, that's the part that's lacking. Of getting somebody to believe that we belong to each other, that no, it's not their choice to be homeless. They didn't make this choice to do, or our homeboys making these choices to be where they are.
That's right.
So I was hoping that maybe you could speak a little bit to when you first started with this whole program, how did you get people to believe? Because I can't imagine that at a school, being parochial or not, that everybody was willing to take on the project of having convicts.
Oh, no, they weren't. They were definitely not. And that was, they passed a petition to give me the boot. But then at one point they had a huge meeting. We need to meet. And I went, okay. And I was bracing myself for, we need a new pastor. And then I didn't speak at all at the meeting. It was packed. And the women themselves, they were the backbone, they just got up and said, "Eso es lo que haría Jesús. This is what Jesus would do." And so that should settle it. It was like that. I went, okay. But you know, it's funny. I was on a panel once. I can't remember who the guy was. He was from the Obama administration, and he just said one word. He said vicinity. And I go, you know, that's right. It's like, put yourself in the vicinity. And you know, I defy anybody to walk into our headquarters and not be changed by it. Everybody walks in, and we have, you know, people from all over the world. We probably had 9 tours today. Students and immersion groups and Georgetown Prep and, you know, people from all over the world. Some people from London, a group from London. And then you feel it. It's palpable. It's hope. And it's, and you look and you go black and brown, and we know they're all enemies and they're hugging each other. I mean, it's like, it's pretty amazing. But the homeless and the gang member have this one thing in common, and that's survivor mode. And they're all carrying chronic toxic stress. And people want to cut to the chase. You want to get to, we're going to deliver services to these populations. Yeah, slow down. Because you can't deliver anything until they've found rest. Until you can give them respite from their chronic toxic stress, you can't deliver any services. So Homeboy, if you will, is kind of a place of rest. It's a sanctuary for the gang member. And then the gang member becomes the sanctuary that he sought. Then he carries that sanctuary to his kids. And for the first time, you've broken a cycle. So, but that's an essential piece. And so I go all over the country, and a lot of we all deliver the same services, you know. And I feel like my only job nowadays is to come and speak to you guys and make sure that we don't become the DMV, you know. You know, now serving number 49, anger management, window 9, you know. No. And so a lot of cities they're in love with content. Here's our 10-step program, and here are the services we deliver. Here's our menu, you know. And Homeboy is more about context. And context is the community. That's the respite from, this jostles them from their own survivor mode. Now you can deliver a service to me. And now I'm ready. But people want to move quickly to, and it's a sense of who these kids are. Like they're deficient. Like, you know, if only they knew more. If only we gave them, you know, these classes, content, insert message here. And it that's not what it's about. The healing piece is, you know, they have to re-identify who they are in the world. That's a hard thing. Oh, I used to think courage was packing a gun. Okay, now I know it has nothing to do with that. That's hard. And what's it mean to be a man? All these different things, you know, do you love your kids more than you hate your enemies? This is hard. And it only happens in the context of a loving, caring community that pays attention. Then they gain resilience that they never had before. Then they leave us. And now the world will throw at them what it will, but this time they won't be toppled. And that's the difference. Old pal. Yes, go.
I just want to stand up a second. My name is Carlos Fernandez. I'm a probation officer with LA County. So I met Father G back in about the summer of '89. So at one point I did a figuring over my 33 years, how many kids I've worked with. It came out to about 7,000. So you can hear him talk and you can see him, and deliver some of the greatest speeches. I always thought that if he wasn't in the priesthood, he'd be the CEO of some big company somewhere. But to actually see the magical work he does with these kids and to see how these kids react to him is something magical, and it's something that I will take with me, you know, for the rest of my life. And it's been a big part of my career. To the fact now that I'm sure he'll tell you that we're working with the children of children who we used to work with, and we're probably going on the grandchildren. So it's been a blessing to be able to work here. It's kind of ironic that we come back to this part of the city where I grew up. I grew up right up the street up here, and without naming what area, the park down the street with the gang I belonged to. And if I wouldn't have made changes, I would have never gone into my career to be able to work with Father G, to work with some of these kids. So it's really special for me to stand up to say that his friendship and our working together has been, it affects me so much that I have this reoccurring dream that I'm in the line to get up to see St. Peter to get through the gates. And everybody's delayed getting their passport, and I raise my hand and say, if I worked with Father G with the gang members.
Carlos, you'll appreciate this. I had a homie in the other day and tattooed, and they do this all the time. Do you remember me? I go, no. I made my first communion with you at Central. You remember? I was little, you were skinny. I said, well, no, I don't remember this. Thank you, though. We've seen a lot in the probation department, too, and I still go to the camps, but a lot of them are closing, and you can say on the one hand a good thing, but there was staff like you who were appropriate adults and they needed it. I always had this experience where this kid is 15 years old, he's going on 30, he's out of control, and then I go visit him in a camp, and there were people like you where suddenly I didn't recognize the kid. Why? He was age appropriate for the first time in his life. He's 15, and yes, and he looks at you like father, like older brother, like, yes, I go to bed, okay, I will, and get up and chore and school, yes. And then what always would happen, we don't understand about this kid. You know, he's about to go home next week, and he acted out so outrageously, we had to give him 3 more months. I go, bingo, because you're about to return him to a situation that's horrific. And so we have like 1 girls' camp left, I think, right? Scott, I'm going there on Saturday, and it's dwindling and dwindling, and staff there were saying, well, we're probably going to close this. I said, well, what's going to happen to the girls? Well, we're going to leave them in the community. And I go, yeah, what's going to happen to the girls? You know, because they're all impacted by horrific kind of, they needed to be rescued. And I just, that kind of, and you know, we're old enough to know that. I remember I would get trotted out by the oldest guard to, you know, sit in front of the board of supervisors so they wouldn't close the camps, because I knew kind of at their best it was a respite. To this day, I have homies who talk lovingly and admiringly of staff who say, yeah, he was feeding me. That was the homie right there. Well, yeah, loving, caring adult who paid attention. So, anyway, don't get me started. But thank you. Yeah.
You were talking about the residential as a plan. You had like 5-year, 10-year vision for...
Probably, and this is why I would never be a CEO. So there's probably a plan somewhere, you know, and I have a CEO. I remember right after he took, I was so happy to have a CEO because it's such a huge operation. I'm happy not to have to worry about cash flow and budgets and stuff. He does. His name is Tom. And a homie came into my office and he said, damn, gee, my lady, she is in a bad mood today. I said, why? Well, you know, she's beginning her administration period. And I said, well, I just finished mine, so kind of know what she's going through. So I'm happy not to do that. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you've been doing this for 25 years.
Yeah.
Can you talk about 35 years ago, people that were with you at that time, your members at that time, where are they now?
Yeah, where are they now? You know, they're, I just saw a guy, I hadn't seen him in 20 years, and I don't know what he does. He sells like insurance. I go, you are kidding me, look at you. And he was unrecognizable. You know, they, part of the thing at Homeboy is you want to accelerate the maturing out process. That's hard to do. So, you know, you think about people in recovery, how many drug rehabs, for example, do you have for adults? And you can say there aren't enough. But if you say, how many are there for kids, teenagers? Nothing. I mean, really nothing. And one of the reasons is, and this is, I don't know how to get at this, but one of the reasons is because no amount of me wanting that kid to go into rehab will ever be the same as the kid wanting recovery. So you have to, I don't know how to accelerate things. And that's what we talk about all the time. So if a kid comes out of camp, I hand out my cards, thousands, you know. In the old days, you'd have 400 kids, 200 kids. There are not that many now. But I hand out a card to every single one. I said, here's my promise. Listen very carefully. Call me. You will start work the next day. And people go, oh my God, are you insane? How can you promise that? Because we know these kids, you know. Again, another thing that happens all the time, a kid will say, do you remember me? And he's covered in tattoos. And, you know, he'll usually identify, you know, you baptized me at Camp Miller or something. And then he pulls out my card and he hands it to me. And I look at it and it's yellowed and crinkly and I go, whoa, that's like 4 addresses ago. Wow. Then I go to hand it back. This always happens. Big tears in his eyes. He says, I should have called you. And you know what's transpired? You know, he's all tatted down. Went to prison for a long stretch. I should have called you. So I tell that in camps. I always say, don't be that guy. And still, you would think if I handed out 100 cards, you know, I'd get 100 kids. And we've never failed on that guarantee. You start the next day here. And then we triple team them. And the homies who run the place are, hey, come here. You know, and it's hard because they're young. And it's more likely I'll see them in another institution than at Homeboy. But the ones that come in are red carpet and ticker tape parade. But it's tougher with the younger ones. Then you get somebody who did 20 years in prison. Well, he's in a different place. But we fast track people all the time. If somebody just by some whatever walks in our door and you know, we fast track people. Go, oh, you start tomorrow, even if they're not a young kid. If they're, you know, my knucklehead-ometer goes off, you know, and I go, oh no, this guy, we got to bring him in. That's who we exist for. And it's violent, seriously offending gang members. And I don't want us to ever change that, you know, because that's why I think we have a singular impact on public safety, because we're working with people nobody else wants to work with. I asked a homie, he went to one of our interviews, how'd it go? He goes, I think I made a good impression. I said, oh, shoot. He goes, why? Well, we only hire people who make bad ones, so it's not quite that way. But we want the hard-headed and the belligerent because it's a place of healing. You know, if you pretty much have your act together, you know. Anyway, I think I've overstayed my welcome. Anyway, thank you all very much.